to get in because we know there were some issues with the link, and then we'll get started at probably 3:05. Thanks. Okay, I'm conscious of time, so I think it's best we get going and people can join as they do. So thanks for joining us, everyone, to today's virtual Learning Cafe. We have a very important topic to explore today, which is the role of key workers and trusted relationships in the lives of young people at risk of violence. So this project was commissioned by the Department for Education, and it's part of a wider program of research that we have at YEF with the DFE, and that includes other studies. We're looking at identity, we're looking at psychological therapies, we're looking at knife crime in schools, we're looking at how the police safeguard arrested children, and all of these projects will be reporting in the coming weeks and months as well. But today I'm really pleased to introduce Madeleine Rolfe and Tara de Clark from Crest Advisory, and they conducted this research looking at key workers. So a very warm welcome to them, and also a very warm welcome to our colleagues from DFE who have joined us today. So with that, I'll hand over to Madeleine and Tara from Crest Advisory. And if you'd like me to start sharing the slides, just let me know. I'll do that. Thanks.
Thanks, Hashim. I think you can start sharing them now, if that's okay. Thank you. Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Madeleine, and I'm from Crest, which is a crime and justice focused consultancy and think tank. I was the project manager for this piece of work, and I'm really happy to be here today to tell you a little bit about our key findings and hold a discussion as well at the end. I'm joined by my colleague Tara, who was the lead analyst on this project. We'll be presenting today, and we also have Hashim, obviously, and Alice Bull from DFE. And I just wanted to say they were our key points of contact, and they were fantastic throughout the full project at giving us really helpful advice and guidance, and we couldn't have done it without them. So I wanted to start with a shout out there. We'll move on to the next slide, please. Just the agenda for today. So we have about an hour to take you through this research, which was, of course, commissioned by the Department for Education and done in partnership with the Youth Endowment Fund. We today will go over the background of the research, briefly the methodology, the key findings, and then finally we'll have about 20 minutes at the end to go over some questions from you. and we'd be really happy to answer those. So if we can move to the next slide, please. This work sits in the context of the Department for Education and Youth Endowment Fund wider programme of research into serious youth violence. It sought to add to the evidence base on how young people affected by serious violence can be effectively supported by professionals. The work came about because we know that systems of support, such as youth justice, education, and healthcare, can be confusing and sometimes difficult to navigate for young people and their families. However, evidence suggests that having a dedicated, consistent key worker who can build a trusted relationship with the young person can be really beneficial to supporting them to have better access to services and also reduce their vulnerability to violence. So that's what we wanted to address, and we did that by seeking to answer 4 key research questions. So those include how can different key worker models be implemented effectively in the context of reducing serious youth violence and when supporting diverse groups of young people with lived experience of serious youth violence. How can key workers build trust with young people affected by serious youth violence? What role do key workers play in bridging that gap between young people and vital support services? And what are the perceived impacts of having a key worker on outcomes that are strongly associated with serious youth violence? And how can those impacts be better recognized and also measured? Great, so we'll move on to the next slide, and I'm going to hand over it to Tara.
Hi everyone. Here I just wanted to give a short overview of how we conducted the research. We conducted 48 interviews with key workers, managers, and children and young people. These interviews were online and in person and held across England to capture diversity of views. In terms of the types of key workers and managers we interviewed, these included youth practitioners, A&E navigators, and youth justice workers, and we engaged with young people between 12 to 18 years of age. There's obviously a lot of information to digest here, so we'd be happy to answer more questions during the Q&A. But moving on to the next slide, please. So on this slide, I just want to highlight some of the key ways that we ensure children and young people were at the centre of this research. This started at the mobilisation phase, where we developed a tailored ethics framework and refreshed our training on trauma-informed qualitative engagement. We also undertook co-design of the interview questions with young people and key workers. This involved holding workshops with children and practitioners and testing and refining the questions to ensure they were appropriate and relevant. For the children, we felt that the co-design was particularly important because the use of specific language had a significant impact on how the children responded to our questions. Some children who also participated in the co-design also joined an interview. This gave them the opportunity to see their contributions be put in action. More broadly, our recruitment and engagement materials were also tailored to young people. For example, we developed a variety of formats, including videos and posters, to ensure that a range of young people could hear about the research and understand what we were doing. When it came to the interviews themselves, we held these flexibly based on the young people's preferences. Most were held in person and in locations such as schools or youth hubs, where they felt comfortable and recognised the room, and key workers were always nearby if the children needed support. All young people who took part were given a £25 voucher to a shop of their choice in appreciation of their time and contributions as well. I want to point out that there's a quote from a key worker, which we really appreciate, which is, "I feel very confident with how you've approached the engagement. You've made sure that the questions are appropriate for our young people through co-design. A lot of external organisations do not take such a thoughtful approach to youth engagement." We were really pleased with this feedback, and this has really inspired us to build on these methods going forward. Next slide, please.
Great, thanks, Tara. So now we'd like to summarise our key findings, and just to note that the full report is available on the DFE website. Okay, so we found that the role of a key worker is well understood and that the functions of a key worker are widely agreed upon. Through our evidence review and then our engagement, we determined the definition of a key worker as a trusted professional in a child's life who is responsible for coordinating support across different services such as health, education, and youth justice. But we found that although the role is well understood, the term is not regularly used by practitioners or children and young people. One reason we found for this was that the term is reminiscent for some people to the pandemic, which has sort of negative connotations for them. Instead, terms such as youth worker and youth practitioner are used, and you can see some of the other synonyms there as well. Next slide, please. So our next finding is that the term key worker can refer to many professions across systems of support. So not all professions specifically focus on serious youth violence, for example, a head of year or youth worker, but they may focus on vulnerabilities related to serious youth violence, such as educational inclusion and self-esteem. As shown in this diagram, many of the professions with key working responsibilities operate in different systems of support, such as education and then health. However, as a key worker, they build on connections with different individuals and organizations across this wider system to ensure that young people can reach the support they need from both statutory and non-statutory services across that whole system. And now I'll pass over to Tara to do the next slide, please.
So through this research, we have developed our understanding of the attributes of key workers, which help develop trusted relationship with the child. These attributes can be categorized into skills and experience and relationship building qualities, as seen in the slides. In terms of skills and experience, the two most important attributes were collaboration and lived experience. When referring to lived experience, practitioners and children shared that it was not just having experience with the criminal justice system, but it can also mean experience with the local community or mental health issues or substance misuse. Relationship building qualities are also important in key workers. These include being authentic, empathetic, and non-judgmental, and having professional curiosity. One key worker told us, there might be issues that are not immediately visible. For example, they punched a wall, but actually, you begin to realize after working with them, it's actually not anger, it's other things they are facing. This is a great example of something we heard a lot, which is that a lot of key workers go above and beyond to see how they can support the child or young person. Next slide, please. We also asked young people to describe their key worker in 3 words. These chosen words emphasize the positive light in which the children and young people we spoke to view their key workers. I'll let you read the words for yourselves, but as an example, we can see here the words hardworking, understanding, caring, and motherly. We often heard children tell us about how they wanted to be like their key worker and who saw them as a role model. Next slide, please.
Great. So one of our aims was to better understand how key workers deliver support to young people. While the exact methods of delivery vary across key workers and are adapted based on the needs of the individual young person, we identified a 4-stage approach of delivery by key workers to support young people and reduce their vulnerability to violence. These stages amount to what we call the key worker model. I'm just going to go through the different stages and highlight a few points about each one. So stage 1 is allocation of a key worker. This involves referral, assessment to understand the young person's needs, and the allocation of a key worker. One thing I wanted to highlight is the importance of clear communication with the young person throughout the allocation process. Some young people we spoke to explained their negative perceptions of professionals and their apprehension about the whole referral process going into it. However, they said that the best key workers put them at ease by listening and offering to help clarify anything that wasn't clear. I also wanted to point out the variety of assessment methods that can be used to gain a holistic understanding of young people's needs. So most practitioners use a combination of formal and informal methods to tailor their assessments. They can also engage with a wide range of stakeholders, including the young people, of course, their parents and guardians, and other professionals that the young people might have in their life. And then just to go back, informal assessments might include sort of conversations between the young people and maybe even family members, and formal assessments might be something like online forms. Stage 2 is the delivery of support. The location, duration, and level of engagement varies upon the key worker, the organization, and also the young person. So, for example, we met some young people who have a key worker they meet with once a day for a whole year, while others meet just weekly for the period of about a month or a couple months. We found that one-to-one sessions are the primary method used by key workers to deliver direct support. And through these sessions, key workers deliver support to young people in 5 main ways. So this can be through discussions, social activities, and also learning opportunities, serious youth violence targeted interventions, for example, something like drug awareness, or something that involves them understanding the justice system better, connecting young people with wider systems of support, and by strengthening young people's connections with family and friends. Stage 3 is about monitoring outcomes, which key workers do, we found, through direct feedback from the young person or maybe their family as well. Data on the young person's level of engagement with their key worker. That might mean something like the number of meetings attended, for example. And also they collect feedback from other professionals that might be supporting the young person on how sort of they're improving or how they're doing generally. And then finally, stage 4 is transitioning from a key worker. This is enabled through managing young people's expectations from the outset. It can be a really difficult time, but it can be improved by clearly communicating, the key worker clearly communicating with the young person, sort of the period of time that they'll be engaging with them and what that might look like. Then we also found that developing a case study with evidence, collecting evidence over time of the young person being ready to move on can be really helpful, and also communicating that progress to the young person can really help them understand why they might be ready to move on and transition from a key worker. And then finally, taking a gradual approach with the young person throughout the transition. So not immediately moving the young person on to a different service or to no other service at all. We found a few examples of this, and it was really difficult for the young people. Okay, then we can move on to the next slide, please. This diagram sets out what we found in our deep dive into a local area and highlights how a key worker model operates locally to support young people who've experienced serious youth violence. The diagram sets out how key workers interact with each other and also systems of support in a local area. You can see on the side that there are in green, there are 2 different types of young people, and then like the delivery of support from the referral, allocation, delivery stage is different and is suited to their needs. And this diagram also highlights how connected key workers are to a range of services and the variety of support that they can use to support young people. Okay, move to the next slide, please. Thank you. So we found that the delivery of support to young people is enabled by factors at different levels, including the key worker level, organizational level, and also externally outside of key workers and the organization they're in. In this slide, I'm going to just run through the enablers and barriers at the key worker level. So key workers enable the delivery of support to young people affected by serious youth violence through their approach and their qualities. For example, by tailoring support, involving young people in co-production to tailor that support, setting clear boundaries, being goal-focused, using accessible and appropriate language, providing transparent support, and thinking outside of the box. I just wanted to add a little bit more detail on thinking outside of the box in the key worker context. So generally, this involves the key worker adapting their approach to suit the individual young person. For example, we heard about key workers framing difficult conversations in an unexpected way. So one example was over a game of football, they had a difficult conversation, which they felt was appropriate in that setting, rather than in a more formal setting that they didn't feel was appropriate for that young person. In addition, key workers can suggest novel approaches to support young people. So that might, one young person told us about how the meditation practices their key worker showed them supported them with their anxiety. And you can see the quote there in gray relates to that. So they said, my key worker suggested listening to meditation or meditative music, which has been helpful in managing my social anxiety and behavior. Great. And then key worker level barriers, just quickly, those can include over-reliance on individual staff, social media, and it being the wrong time for a young person to accept and receive support. Just in terms of social media, to explain that a little bit more, that can prevent young people from engaging with key workers by contributing to low feelings of low self-esteem, less engagement in offline activities, and increased exposure to harmful content. Therefore, we found that it's really important for key workers to build strong relationships with young people, which might mean sort of developing a nuanced understanding of their online behaviors and perhaps using social media in a positive way that impacts them in a good way rather than harming them. And I'll move on to the next slide, please, or I'll hand over to Tara.
Thank you. Beyond the key worker and child relationship, as Maddie just explained, there are many other variables that impact the quality of support provided. So we split these into organisation and external level factors. Firstly, organisations need to be responsible for ensuring that key workers have the necessary skills to support children and young people vulnerable to serious youth violence. Organisational enablers include training and resources, staff well-being, supervision and reflective practice, and adaptable use of resources. These are all essential factors that really strengthen the resilience of key workers and enable them to continuously adapt and improve their practice to support the child's needs. Supporting vulnerable children and young people was also described by many key workers as incredibly rewarding. So, however, the role can also take an emotional, mental, and physical toll. Key workers need the space to take stock and reflect on their work and the impact it's having on children as well as themselves. We found that supervision and reflective practice were especially important to many key workers. So many organisations offered internal supervision via regular check-in points, in addition to encouraging external counselling. Moving on to external challenges, these include the availability of support services. This can often be due to insufficient funding and difficulty in recruiting staff. Support also needs to be provided at the right time. In some instances, the key worker is not able to support the child as it is not the right time for them to accept and receive support. This research suggests that engaging with the child's parents or guardians can help maintain that indirect connection with the child until they are ready. Additional barriers include short commissioning cycles, which make it hard to implement long-term planning for children and ensure the support provided to them is continued. Finally, collaboration through partnership working is the cornerstone of key working. Partnership working should exist among all tiers of a key working organisation, as well as the different individuals that make up a child support network. Strong communication channels and multi-agency engagement help equip organisations with the latest knowledge and resources to deal with complex issues. For example, when faced with an uptick of children entering hospital for issues related to ketamine use, one A&E navigator highlighted the value of being able to reach out to practitioners in different regions who've had previous experience with these problems. Thank you. Moving on to Maddie for the final bits.
Great, thanks, Tara. So key workers consistently explained the challenges associated with measuring the impact of support to young people for the purposes of monitoring and evaluation. Through this research, we identified some common challenges key workers and organizations face in measuring their impact. One challenge is that extensive impact evaluations can divert time and resources away from key workers supporting young people, as well as reduce their ability to build a relationship with the young person. Another challenge is variance in data collection. Reporting requirements vary across organizations, and approaches to measuring impact can also vary from one organization or contract to the other. This makes it difficult to compare sometimes. Third, the needs and goals of young people are different, and this comparison again can be challenging. And fourth, isolating the impact of key workers from other factors is difficult. So, for example, randomized control trials take time and they're very difficult to implement in this context, in part due to ethical considerations. We also have an incomplete understanding of intermediate outcomes associated with serious youth violence, which might be helpful in helping us to assess young people's sort of slower progress away from crime. but those would need to be developed further. And next slide, please. But despite these measurement challenges, we heard about the perceived impacts of key workers on outcomes related to serious youth violence. So the YEF Outcomes Framework report sets out a range of primary and secondary outcomes that are important to their mission of preventing young people from becoming involved in serious youth violence. And that framework helped to guide our approach. However, we ended up including a broader range of outcomes in our report, and this slide reflects what we heard throughout the research. The impacts included here include reduced reoffending, reduced hospital admissions for serious youth violence-related incidents, school engagement, social skills and managing relationships, accessing employment opportunities, development of a sense of self, access to healthcare, improved engagement with professionals in the CJS, community engagement, and behavioral and emotional regulation. One young person reflected that it makes me feel proud of myself, but at the same time, I'm grateful for the people that supported me. I feel like if it wasn't for my key worker, I wouldn't improve my behavior. So that highlights that the young person obviously worked hard, but that their key worker had an impact on their behavior improving. And just to note that key workers often set out to achieve multiple impacts with the young people they support, depending on their individual circumstances. Great. So we'll move to the next slide, please. And this here, I just wanted to finally include a case study on how a key worker supported a young person impacted by serious youth violence, which really highlights the benefits of key working. This key worker supported the young person to access, navigate, and engage with healthcare, and also supported them over time to reduce their vulnerability to serious youth violence. I'll just run over the details of the case study. So the young person was admitted to hospital with injuries from peer-on-peer knife violence. In hospital, a key worker, an A&E navigator, attended the young person and started developing a positive relationship with them. For example, they brought them their favorite food, and they also helped to mediate conversations between the young person and their mom, which were challenging. The key worker also supported the young person and their mum to better understand the healthcare system, which they were struggling to understand, and it just helped them to access the support they needed within that system. Once the young person was discharged from the hospital, the key worker delivered one-to-one sessions with them. They also supported the young person by accompanying them in their community to address their safety concerns following the incident that happened to them. That helped them to overcome their sort of fears of going outside, and also helped to instill in them that sense of independence again. Finally, the key worker has helped reduce the young person's vulnerability to violence by encouraging them to do positive goal setting. That's something that we saw a lot across key workers as a way of working, and they supported them to focus on the positive things they can do. In this young person's case, it was football, and they encouraged them to sort of have a schedule. They train daily, and the outcome of that has been a really positive influence on the young person who has ambitions of playing football professionally. So that's almost the end of our presentation, and I just wanted to summarize before we move on to any questions, that we found that key workers support young people with lived experience to lead healthier, happier, and safer lives. And we think it's really vital that key workers are integrated into systems of support and can effectively work together with partners across these systems to help young people to access, navigate, and engage the support that they need. The potential of key workers to significantly impact young people's vulnerability to violence should be considered in any plans to tackle serious violence among young people going forward. So that is the end of our presentation. We'll move to the next slide, and happy to hear any comments, reflections, or take any questions that you have.
Great. Thanks very much both for that. That was super interesting. And yeah, so now it's time for questions. So if anyone has any questions, do raise your hand, and we'll get that question asked to the team. Still no questions? Okay, we've got a question from Holly Fleming. Janina, are you able to unmute Holly for the question?
Yes, I've just given her permission to turn her thing on.
Thank you. I was just about to say I do have a question, but you won't hear it. Hello, thank you. That was such an interesting sort of summary of your report. I'm sorry if you covered it already in some of those more detailed findings, but did you find anything in relation to like a particular subset of like serious violence? Did you kind of like define that in terms of sort of like knife crime or sort of violence against girls, or any, did you find any differences in any of those, or was it quite a wide definition of the term violence? Fine either way, just thank you.
Thank you, that's okay. We did take a wide definition of the term violence. It was based on the YEF definition, and we didn't focus too much on the different types of serious violence. In terms of how we involved it in our research, it was a criteria for young people engaging. So it helped, we asked young people and their key workers if they had been impacted by serious youth violence, and that meant that they could engage in the project. But then we didn't, because the interviews were quite short, we spent about an hour with each young person. We didn't go into details about sort of the details of how they were personally impacted by serious youth violence unless they wanted to talk about it. So that wasn't a focus. It was more about how their key worker supported them with either it could be serious youth violence in their community if they'd been a victim or even perpetrated serious youth violence. Knife crime came up a lot, as well as drug use, and some issues with sexual violence as well. So those are things that came up, but we didn't include the details of that in the report just because we didn't go into too much detail with the young people, because we wanted to focus on sort of a positive relationship with them over the course of that 1 hour interview. But it's a super interesting nuance to focus on in future research. Thank you. I think I see another hand.
Yeah, we've got Caroline from...
Hiya. I've got a question about the safety planning when a child's been a victim of knife crime and how complex that is. And even when you were mentioning about the sports, like certain children can't go and play sports in certain areas because of risk to life. So how did you really manage that complex safety planning when it came to children being discharged from hospital? So I'm really interested in your findings in that. And also a second question, if you don't mind, I'm just going to tack on. Did you look at contextual safeguarding within the youth court setting as well? And did you come across any complexities with that? Thanks so much.
Thank you. So on the first question, safety planning, is that in terms of how key workers manage that in sort of their work with young people?
Yeah,
rather than
within
us
the community.
as
Yeah, or just when you were kind of evaluating it all together. I mean, because it's a really complex issue, and when you talk about sports, like I know of one young person, just off I could mention, off the top of my head right now, he wouldn't go to the academy area because of potential risk of violence. This is, when we start showing into that kind of it's very complex. And how did you navigate that would be a question. Or did you just wait for a period of time, or use community intelligence, police intelligence on threat to life, all that kind of stuff? And then the second was like in youth court planning. I'm talking about really like the higher level of serious violence. Thank you.
Yeah. On the safety planning, I think that isn't something that we focused on in too much detail. However, it did come up in terms of key workers adapting their approach to suit each young person. So of course, where a young person felt like they weren't able to go in the community because an incident had happened that made them feel unsafe, or they didn't want to go in an area, we found that key workers were really adaptive to how they would engage with the young person and put the point of engaging regularly with them at the heart of what they did. So one example that we heard actually quite often was engaging with young people in the key workers car, which sounds unique. If there's key workers on the call, maybe this isn't so unique to you, but it was a way that we consistently heard of key workers making young people feel safe by bringing them to a different environment, where they could have an open conversation and wouldn't be worried about a peer or anyone else seeing them with a professional. So that's one way I think that we saw safety planning sort of happening. We didn't systematically evaluate how that is undertaken, but we just collected examples of some of the ways that the sort of 25 key workers we spoke to did that. And then, does that answer the question? And on contextual safeguarding, could you repeat that question? I'm sorry, and then I can answer that one.
Yeah, just in the youth courts where a child, even though they may be on the NRM, the National Referral Mechanism, they're taken into a youth court setting, they may be spotted by another young person, and that is just on how, again, I suppose the safety planning of that, how did you find the key worker was beneficial to that? Maybe by always being, chaperoning, I suppose, a bit of an old-fashioned word, but just I'm just kind of just really interested in your takeaways, and thanks for the answer of the last question. That was helpful.
Yeah, that's okay. So youth courts, I think what we found most in that context was the idea that key workers play a really important role in preparing young people for navigating different systems, including the justice system. So we heard of key workers and also young people who explained to us how key workers would talk them through different processes, whether that be court, or even one example was engagement with police. So we heard from one young person who explained that they had been worried about being stopped and searched. However, they brought this up with their key worker, and through a conversation with them, they practiced what that might be like. And then as a result, it did actually happen. They told us in retrospect that they felt much more confident navigating that situation as a result of having gone through what that unfortunate encounter would be like. And that was just a really good example of how a key worker could support a young person to navigate, not in the courts in that case, but a different aspect of the justice system.
Thank you.
It's okay.
Great.
I also wanted to add on that quickly as well, just the fact that what we found was really important was that the key workers really took on board what the children and young people wanted, and that often actually really led to the creation of kind of a really thorough safety plan. So with, for example, with the courts and the police, it was primarily the children that kind of led, that kind of highlighted their own needs rather than just a checklist of what the practitioners thought was needed. So I just thought that's important.
That's really helpful. Thank you.
That's great. Thanks both. So any more questions? We've got some time left, so if you've got something which you weren't sure about asking, do feel free to jump in. Caleb.
You have to unmute yourself after Yanina's done the magic and put your camera on. Caleb Jackson, head of change for Youth Sector, and thank you so much, Madeline and Tara, for sharing this back. And Hashim and I have had a few conversations about this piece. There's a couple of things that I'd love to just hear from you. The first part is, if you're speaking to someone who has done this sort of line of work and support, they'll sit here kind of going, oh yeah, but this is kind of bread and butter of being able to work with these young people and appreciate those points. But it's great to actually have some form of evidence that leans towards what does this actually look like in this context. I think just as a youth sector representative from YEF, the more we understand about the dynamics of relationship building in each context, the better picture we understand about the people, the valuable people in it. What's your view to kind of hitting home about the importance of these behaviors becoming a little systematized in terms of improving quality and recognition of such a fundamental piece for children? And just if I may, like, I'm asking from a point of, there are some who would work closely with these individuals that will never understand what it is that these individuals do, and that can cause a real clash. Classic case in point, they love to talk to us whilst we're driving, but that's not an activity, that's not a thing. How's that improving their outcome? So just over to you. I'd just love to hear your thoughts on this. How do we get the system to appreciate this vital element?
Yeah, that's a really good question. It's really interesting how when we spoke to key workers, they consistently said, like, we know we have such an important impact, but we just don't, and the kids see that, but we don't feel like other professionals recognize this. And that was one of the biggest problems. But I think that something that I found really interesting was something that I'd like to emphasize more is the fact that across the young people we spoke to, and the key workers, it wasn't anything to do with their specific skills or qualifications that made them like good at the job. It was the way that they can be like authentic, empathetic, and those are really important skills that maybe other professionals don't offer them. And that is something that is so important in across key workers that needs to be sort of highlighted more. I think another really important, maybe more practical finding was the point that what key workers do is establish this really close bond and trusted relationship with young people. And we found that that can really be a foundation for their young people's interactions with other professionals. And basically the way a key worker sort of can bond with a young person and help them lays the foundation for their engagement with other professionals, and can make it a lot easier for other professionals to engage with them. Like a good example would be someone like a judge or a police officer, something like that. And that should be recognized by those other professionals as being instrumental to like their interactions with young people and helping them do their job as well. So maybe that's something that I'd like to emphasize. I'll just see if Tara has anything that she wants to add to.
Yeah, I think your point on having a system-wide kind of piece of framework for key working is really important. And I think having some sort of theory of change that is kind of informed by this research to help develop the key practices of key working is really important. However, I think the challenge there is to not stifle it too much, so we can't really kind of allow for creativity for key workers, because the importance is there just to be focused on each child and each need, which is obviously so different. So it's really striking the balance there, and I think that's really important.
Thank you both. I mean, I could chew on this for a while, but thank you both.
Great, excellent. Thanks both for that answer. And any more questions? Don't be shy. Do you raise your hand? Okay, great. Well, this has been super interesting and really useful. And just for the sake of the audience, I'll post a link to the report. So if you're interested in reading the full report, you can get it in the DFE website. So I've just posted the full link there. That should take you to it. And yeah, so thanks very much, Madeline and Tara and the whole team who conducted this research. You were absolutely fabulous throughout from start to finish. And the report that we've had and the presentations that we've just had is really testament to that. So thanks very much. And thanks also to colleagues from DFE who I believe were unfortunately muted, and the cameras were off for this. This is a security issue we've had at a few of our VLCs, which is the reason why we've had to keep things quite tight for external people outside of YEF. No other reason. But thanks everyone for coming, and thanks Tara and Madeline again, and thanks for the questions too. Have a lovely rest of the days.
Thank you to you too. Thanks everyone. Thanks for joining.
Bye.